Hey everybody, this is the third video, so thanks for hanging in there. And in this video I'm going to show you a little bit more with working with SPSS, specifically the variable view and the tab view in the data file. Now before I get to that, let's go back to where we were. We ended up at the last video with two different windows in SPSS. The output window, which shows the results of the analysis with the means and standard deviation. But I also had the data window itself. Both of these windows or files need to be saved. And you're going to do them the way you normally would, file, save, etc. Now I've already saved these and they look like this. This is the icon form. Of the two of those windows, the one that's critical to save as you're working is the data window. If the data window is saved, you can always do the output again. All right. Now, I'm going to show you at the end of this video, but I'll mention it now while I'm talking about saving. You can, of course, export this data into Excel or other formats, and also the output window can be exported into Word. So that's critical. You're going to want to save your output window, but you're also going to want to save it in another format like Word or Excel, and then you'll be more ready to bring it into a document that you might actually be sharing with others. All right, so here's the data editor, and it looks like a spreadsheet, but there's two different views here, the data view and the variable view. So the data view, every row in this is a row of data, like one person filled out this survey, another person filled out this survey, etc. Now before we go any further and I show you the variable view, I do want you to kind of look at what is here. So timestamp is the first column. How many years have you been in your current position is second. What is your current position? Please rate your experience with supervision, whatever that says. All right? Try to kind of remember those first four columns. The variable view, each row is one of those columns. All right, so there's the timestamp column. How many years in your current position? What is your current position? Please rate your experience. And then for each of these variables, there's a lot of information available. So there's a data type. And of course, different data types you can do different kinds of operations with. As I said earlier, it has to be numeric to do most of the analysis. A string data type is words, letters, and most types of analysis won't. You can't do with those. All right. The first one, the timestamp, it recognized it as a date data type, which makes sense. I really don't need that variable in here, but I've got it. All right. So you've got the data type, you've got the width of the variable. Now a lot of these are just one character wide, but it's defaulting to these numbers, which doesn't hurt anything. And whether there's decimals, labels, which we're going to get into, and other information. Right? The ones that we're going to focus on in this video are the name and the label. I guess also to a certain extent the data type, being aware of what it is, because if you get stuck and you can't do an operation, it might be because the data type isn't being recognized the way you think it is. All right, so the first one, I've got this awkward title here, so I'm going to change this title, and I'm going to change a few more here, and you may want to do the same with yours. So I'm going to start doing that now, and I'll come back in a second. All right, so I have done some editing of the names in the name column and in the label column. These are very closely related, and you can see I've done very similar labels and names, but they have slightly different functions. All right. First of all, one of the things you'll notice is that for this row here, instead of saying impartial supervision or supervision impartial with a space in between them, I used an underscore between the words. This names in SPSS cannot have spaces or unusual characters, pretty much letters. So anytime I'm using multiple words, I use the convention of an underscore in between my words so that later there's different places these are going to appear. I can read them. If I run all my words together without spaces, I have trouble reading them. Over here, I can write something with spaces, and this is what's going to actually appear in my output. So I make it a little bit more meaningful. Instead of supervision impartial, I say supervision is impartial. Instead of clear criteria, criteria are clear. Instead of feedback helps, I receive feedback on my performance that helps me improve. Now this longer one actually is probably the better one that I've done here because it's the actual statement that was on the survey. And so when I see my output, it's a little bit helpful to see that statement so I can make sense of interpreting the data more easily. Right. Now that I've got a little bit of work done, I want to go back to the data view and notice that those names are now the names for my columns. So that's helpful. All right. So I'm going to do the analyze, the same output that I did before, and I think I'm going to go, I think these are the same 4 that I had before. But now notice, what I want you to notice is, let me put these all back. All right. So now it's a little easier to read in my data window because I don't have those crazy variable names. And notice I can also expand this window to make it even easier to read. I want my variable names to be kind of short because they're going to appear in this window and there's only so much space even when I expand it. All right. So names short. Bring them over, run my analysis. Now notice how much better this is than the other one. Before I had this output that was kind of hard to read because the variable label was bad. And here's where you see the difference between the name and the variable label. The variable label is what appears in the output. Supervision is impartial, criteria are clear, as opposed to the label, which is what appears in the commands and in the data view. Right? Notice here that I did not change my options when I did the descriptors, so I got some extra information that I really didn't need. Good time to show you this cool thing about SPSS. As you're doing output, it keeps this running log of everything you've done. And you can navigate easily when you get a lot of stuff. You can navigate by going like this. But you can also delete, and this is very common, something you're going to do a lot. You're going to do an analysis, go, oh, that was wrong, I didn't want to do it that way, or let me try this, and you find that certain things you're doing are not useful, and you just select it and delete it. I just hit the delete button. So I'm going to run the same report again, but this time I'm going to remember to change my options the way I like them, right? And I'm getting nicer data output. So remember that the columns here are the variables, and each column becomes a row in the variable view. The name in the variable view is the name that appears at the top of the column and when you do a command. The label is what appears in your output.